Great day in the morning. This is Jonathan Albin, and this is Game Master's Soapbox. This is the program where we go over details and questions of the day in the frame of reference of what can make for the best roleplay games, what are the best practices in a roleplay game, and generally what can we do to generate the most fun possible. And today we're going to be talking about a subject that's rather near and dear to my heart because it really does have a influence on the way people look at their games over time, and that is they often wonder, why do games groups collapse? What is it about the mechanic of getting a group of people together that seems to operate, smooth as silk for 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks, and then just something starts to shudder and collapse, and the whole thing falls apart? Or another possibility is that you run a great solid campaign for 10 months, and all of a sudden one weekend everybody just vanishes and it just is gone. It's no longer there. And we're going to address this today. We're going to look at some of the root causes for why groups collapse, and then I'm going to make some recommendations. So stick around to the end so you'll catch those recommendations, if you will. Alrighty, so when we talk about the things that could drive people apart, we have to realize that there is, the reality that life is not just playing games. I know that's a shock to many of you. The idea that you actually have something that you could be doing other than playing. I know, right? That's the way I feel too. But the reality is, schedules change. You may have had three people that were all on day shift, and suddenly one or two of them have to move to the swings. Or maybe you've been working with all the weekends free, and suddenly somebody has a job that takes up weekend spots. These kind of changes occur, and we have to be able to adapt and roll with them. Of course, you'll find that when we get to my solutions and my conclusions, they become pretty self-evident. Here we go. So this is definitely something that is a part of what causes games group to fall apart. And I would say, for the largest part, when you're talking about a group that are predominantly adults that are playing, it is the schedules that will kill them. There are way too many different work opportunities these days that don't have you on a regular schedule and make it difficult for you to hold to a monthly or even a weekly schedule for events. But there is something else that's come up in our culture today, and this is perhaps my minute for taking my teeth out and talking about back in my day. People set a commitment and they stuck to it, even if they didn't like it. And they'd stay for as many years, weeks, and years as they have to, because they were joined that campaign, and by God, they were going to finish the objectives. Well, today there's far too many new and exciting things. Every week or so, it seems there's a new games product out there. There's a new model that could be purchased and painted. There's a thousand different things you could do, and so I call this the squirrel syndrome. I'm a big fan of the movie Up, and the dog in there is just hysterical. Squirrel. Yeah, the idea that you can be drawn away by other things. Those of us that are role players remember when Magic the Gathering first came out, and now every time there's a new release, there's a resurgence of people going back to the card game, and inevitably there'll be two or three players that'll be called out of your regular role play group because it happens to coincide or step on top of the day they would have to play Magic. So that's just in a couple of examples, but the idea that we don't necessarily have full control over our uh, schedule, it can also be that we don't have enough attention span, or not we, but we collectively don't have enough attention span to keep commitments. The third way that that one's not good. I need to change that one. Oof. Give me a second there. Yeah, that's awful shady yellow. That did not work out right. No, it doesn't. Oh, the other. Okay. The bloom is off the rose. There you go. Literally, what happened there? The funny and dramatic and exciting of the game has drifted off, and now we're to the routine, mundane rote. We must trek so many miles and fight so many monsters and earn so many experience points and blah blah blah. These models and these limits that put a burden on the game tend to play down its nature of funness, and so when the bloom falls off the rose, then suddenly the attention to your schedule and the maintenance of a steady group is subject to termination. I don't know what happened with that color. That was weird. Looked okay in pre-production. All right, the next is persona incompatibility. And this is kind of important to notice a nuance here. I'm not talking about players having problems. This is just simply one person has built a character whose agenda or whose skill training focus is so different from the others in the group that it's difficult to continue forward, or they feel thwarted, or they feel, or that one of the players or more feel like they're not gaining the advancement they would like to get. In classic standard role play games, this may be one of the biggest breaking points, is simply that a player brings a country bumpkin into a city campaign, and it's partially the player's obligation to bring what information he wants about his character to the table, but it's also the game master's objective to find ways to make it work. So the idea here of incompatibility being a reason for a player to break off is not usually done overtly. This is a player who just, rather than being aggressive again or strong about his opinion, will simply defer from the game. And this sort of passive aggressive approach we're going to see is going to crop up a couple other times in this countdown, so to speak, of reasons why games collapse, because there's not just the persona. Well, I'm going to get ahead of myself. Let's not. All right, so let's go on to the next one. Beyond persona incompatibility, blah, we have player discomfort, and this can vary wildly. In today's culture, the first thing that I thought of when I wrote this player discomfort was the concept that I've seen in several websites that promote role play games, say that there are ways for a player or a person to transmit to their game master their trigger warnings, and I don't know where this came from. It's outside of my comprehension, because players just dealt with whatever happened in the story, and if it was uncomfortable, they'd cringe or say, "Oh, that's not a good thing," or "I don't like that," or whatever. But they didn't fly off the handle and get adversely frustrated with the storyteller or whatever. But today's world is a different place, and so player discomfort. Sometimes people will just simply walk away from a table or withdraw from a game silently because they don't want to exacerbate their discomfort or to cause more discomfort for other people. So this can be something pretty simple, but it can also be fairly complex. So depends on the circumstance. Move as well. There we go. Story stagnation and player disinterest. Now, this can happen for a couple of different ways. One is that if it's a long duration campaign and you've been at it for a number of weeks, you may all of a sudden feel like this story just doesn't follow anymore. It's not something you want to pursue as the storyteller. Conversely, the players may have already seen many of the actions that you're using in a routine pattern, and they are finished with it. And it could simply be that they're pursuing a storyline that people didn't really connect with. And this is actually something that the session 0, of which we've spoken recently, really helps to overcome. But the idea that your player isn't getting they're looking for out of the game is a critical trigger to why they don't stay with the games group. So you have to consider what that might actually be. And finally, player intimidation or predominance. Now, this one is perhaps the most dangerous of them, and this is a twofold problem. It can manifest as a storyteller issue where he shows favoritism to one player over everyone else, or considers one person's position to be better weighted either by his experience or the affinity for the thought processes or whatever. But this player predominance or player intimidation can cause the collapse. And this is the most explosive. This is the group breaker situation. And player intimidation, to which I'm referring, is the concept of a player at the table who perhaps has a modicum of more experience than the average player at the table and thinks he knows better how things should be handled as a group, and takes some kind of pleasure out of intimidating or pushing players around to do what he sees fit. And while this is not necessarily something that is overtly announced, it can lead to rather stressful situations, either with a player being requested to leave a table or a games group literally walking out. I have to say, I've only had, in the entire time I've been a game master, 3 or 4 total party kills where I've destroyed everybody in the group, generally because of a mistake or an error that they made. But I've only had one of these, and that is a TPW, and that's a total player walkout. And that was because there was a person at the table in my group that the others had determined that they were not going to play with. And so, since that person got there first, they all literally walked into the room, shook their head, and walked back out. And so, by the end of the afternoon, I had a complete and total party walkout because the game couldn't be held because of that one person. Now, some of these are incidental, some of these are coincidental, and some of these are intentional, whether overt or covert, whether blatant or insidious. These are the fundamental mechanisms for why groups collapse. So now let's talk about what could be done or what should be done to resolve these kind of conflicts. First thing that needs to happen is that you need to take note of the situation. We as human beings often are oblivious. We go through our lives doing what we do and are surprised at the outcome, even if it's what we planned for. You know, the idea that we can accomplish something mystifies us when we actually do. So in this case, just when you're having a situation and it appears your games group is falling apart, go ahead and take note of the situation. What was going on? What conditions caused it to happen? Where were the limits and the boundaries of where that collapse came from? You can get an idea of where it came from. You get a much better handle on how to, if not stop it at this time, certainly to prevent it from occurring again at a later time. The next point that needs to be made is that the conversation needs to be done as a group. If you're going to talk through it, if you're going to draw attention to it and fix it, really, you're going to resolve a situation and not have the group completely collapse, you need to talk about it as a group. Even if it's a single person's issue with scheduling or whatever, you show honor and validity to that person when you draw attention to them and have the conversation handled collectively instead of just simply adjudicating a decision and making impacts for everyone else. It may seem like you're just making a command decision, but if there is any opportunity for there to be players that connect again later, you definitely need to stay on the friendly side, and to do that, you need to talk through it as a group and handle it as a group. Now, if there are specific allegations of intimidation or violence or bullying or any of that, that's a completely separate issue. That if it gets down to it, that may be a criminal. So be cautious with that. But generally speaking, if you're having a problem with the group, it's better to talk through it as a group and then come to a group's decision on how it should be handled instead of just making an executive. Wow, that one moved. Finally, you need to find ways to offer alternatives. When we have a challenge, we have certainly a idea of what we would do to repair it, to fix it. And by bringing those alternatives to the table with the group, you give more minds an idea of how to chew on whatever that alternative is. Because when you have options, there's more possibility of advocating for the success of the project or whatever. So it's important to endeavor to try to come up with solutions. And maybe you came out with 20 solutions. Maybe you came out with 2. The idea is at least you are attempting to do something. So does this mean that every group will automatically hold together forever? Does this mean that the problem that you're having with your group is going to fit on this list right here, and with a check mark you'll be able to fix it and just move on? Who knows? But the reality is that if you have an idea of the full spectrum of what might be causing groups to have problems, then you have a better handle on maybe figuring out the 1 or 2 that you can isolate and prevent. Because ultimately we all have some of these issues and they happen over and over. And so sometimes it's something we can pick out and analyze, and then other times it's completely off the rails and out of our hands. So just realize that when you are dealing with a conflict that's going to lead to players not playing, it's never a good option to throw up your hands and just walk away, because somebody in that negotiation, in that communication, might stop playing, and that is a bad thing for all of us. Ultimately we want more people playing games, right? Because the more people we have that are playing, the more chances we have to be involved. So we definitely want to thrive for that, and taking into account the reasons why groups fall apart and the things that we can do to prevent it gives us an opportunity to change the future for all role players. This is Jonathan Albin with Game Master's Soapbox. We are glad to have you with us, and we will be switching over to staying on live stream now for the rest of the broadcast. But we have concluded this portion. This portion will be put up on YouTube later on tonight. And again, thank you for watching and being a participant. Alrighty, so if you are on with me